Before we dive into this unforgettable love story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories that heal hearts and fight hate, hit that subscribe button and stay with us forever. Sophia Grace lived a quiet life in a small town just outside Boston. She was 24, white, and worked in a modest tailor shop. Mick Johnson, 36, was one of the richest men in the country. A white self-made millionaire, he had built his name in luxury real estate. Sophia Grace's hands moved like poetry in motion, threading, snipping, sewing, repeating. The rhythmic sound of the sewing machine echoed softly in the old tailor shop, like a heartbeat, keeping time with a life lived in quiet solitude. The air smelled of fabric and warm tea. The wooden floors creaked beneath her small feet as she walked from one corner of the shop to the other. It was her world, modest, fading, and honest, just like her. The town outside moved slowly, like the soft falling snow in winter. Nothing ever changed in that sleepy corner near Boston. Sophia had lived here all her life. At 24, she had never traveled more than 50 miles from her hometown. She didn't need adventure, or so she told herself. The shop had once belonged to her grandfather, her only real family. He had taught her everything about stitches, seams, and sincerity. Put love in every line, Soph, he used to say. People don't just wear clothes, they wear feelings. He died 3 winters ago, and the shop had never been the same without his laughter filling the walls. Now it was just Sophia, the girl with silent eyes and soft lips that hadn't known a kiss. Her stepmother had made sure of that. Cold, cruel, and cutting, always reminding Sophia that she wasn't special. "You'll never be good enough for a real man," she used to sneer, yanking the blankets off Sophia's bed before sunrise. "Your mother ran away from you. I should have done the same." Those words stayed with Sophia, stitched into her soul like scars she couldn't remove. But she kept going. She rose before the sun, made her own breakfast in silence, and opened the shop each day like a ritual. She tailored wedding gowns for brides with glowing faces, hemmed pants for grooms who would never glance at her twice. She crafted dreams for others, while locking hers away inside the deep drawer beneath the cash register. Her hands had calluses, but her heart was still soft. She loved old books, soft music, and rainy days. She talked to herself sometimes when the silence grew too heavy, imagining a world where someone walked in and saw her, really saw her, and yet nobody did. Customers came and went, dropping off suits, grumbling about deadlines, barely thanking her. She smiled anyway. She always smiled. Sophia never complained, never dared to hope for more. She had accepted her fate, the girl behind the counter, good enough to fix seams, never good enough to be seen. But something inside her had always ached. Late at night, when the lights were off, and she sat by the little window with a cup of tea, she would whisper to the moon, "Maybe someday, someone will notice me." That someday arrived wrapped in thunderclouds. It was a Monday. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. The streets were almost empty. Sophia had opened the shop as usual, setting the kettle on and brushing lint off the counter. She wore her soft gray sweater, hair tied in a low bun, needle tucked behind her ear. The bell above the door jingled. She turned and saw a man standing in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered. Raindrops glistened on his black coat. His eyes were a deep, stormy blue, matching the sky outside. He held a perfectly tailored navy blue suit in one hand, and he was soaked. Sophia blinked, unsure if he was real. He looked like someone out of a magazine, not the kind of man who wandered into places like hers. The man looked around, then locked eyes with her. "I need this stitched, urgently." Sophia swallowed hard. Yes, of course. Come in." His presence filled the room like lightning, electric, unexpected. He stepped closer, and for the first time in years, someone looked at her like she wasn't invisible. That moment, quiet, simple, and soaked in rain, was when everything began to change. But Sophia had no idea that the man who just stepped into her shop would one day step into her heart, or that her thread and needle would sew not just fabric, but the first stitches of a love story destined to shock the world. She only knew one thing. For the first time in forever, someone had truly seen her, and her heart, quiet for so long, began to whisper, Don't be afraid to dream. The bell above the tailor shop jingled again, this time louder, sharper, like something big had entered. The wind pushed the door open wider, scattering a few dry leaves inside. And there he was, Mick Johnson. He didn't walk in like an ordinary man. He stepped inside with the weight of power behind him, calm, commanding, controlled. A black umbrella hung at his side, dripping rain on the old rug. His shoes, polished like mirrors, left no mud. Even his silence spoke louder than thunder. At 36, Mick Johnson wasn't just a man. He was a storm in a suit. He wasn't born into wealth. He made it, with grit, sweat, and an empire built from dust and deadlines. His name had been in Forbes. His face had flashed on screens. But none of that mattered to him anymore. The big cities had grown too loud, the people too fake, the women too interested in his wallet and never in his soul. So he left. He had come to this sleepy town near Boston to escape the noise, to renovate an old estate he'd purchased. Something vintage, something real. And now his favorite navy blue suit needed a tailor. The thread on the left sleeve had loosened. He didn't want a high-end fashion studio. He wanted someone local, someone quiet, unbothered by headlines. That's how he found Sophia Grace's shop. The door closed behind him as he stepped further in, holding the suit carefully. His blue eyes swept over the space. Worn wood, antique sewing machines, the smell of lavender and fresh wool. Then his eyes met hers. Sophia stood behind the counter, frozen. Her hands still held the needle she'd just threaded. She had never seen a man like this. Not in real life. Not this close. Not with that jawline, that intensity, or that haunting tiredness in his eyes. He looked important, powerful, but also, strangely, lost. "I need this tailored perfectly," Mick said, his voice deep, smooth, and sharp. "A big event coming up. The cut must be exact. No mistakes." His tone was confident, bordering on impatient, but not cruel. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward. She reached out and took the suit gently, careful not to meet his eyes too long. Her fingers brushed the expensive fabric like it was made of stars. I can do that," she whispered. "2 days. I'll have it ready." There was a pause. Mick didn't move. He kept looking at her, not in the way most rich men looked at women, fast, lazy, with hungry eyes. He studied her like she was a puzzle, like she held a story he wasn't used to seeing. She wore no makeup. Her sweater had tiny stitches where she'd repaired it herself. Her hair was pinned simply, and her eyes held a sadness that felt familiar. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. Sophia blinked. She wasn't used to questions. Most customers barely thanked her, let alone asked her name. "See, Sophia," she replied. "Sophia Grace." Mick nodded slowly, repeating it in his mind. It sounded soft, honest, like spring rain on glass. "I'm Mick," he said, offering no last name. He didn't need to. She didn't ask. But inside, she already felt the name settle in her chest like a stone dropped in water. "Do you work here alone?" he asked, his eyes drifting around the quiet shop. "Yes," she said softly. "It was my grandfather's. I kept it going after he passed." Mick glanced at the sewing machine, then back at her hands, calloused, steady, but gentle. Not soft like city women's hands. These were hands that built things, mended, carried weight. He respected that, maybe more than he expected. "Well, I'll be back in 2 days then," he said, starting to turn. But something stopped him. "Take your time," he added. "If you need 3 days, make it 3. Sophia looked up, startled. Most rich men demanded things on the spot. Not this one. 2 days is fine," she replied. "I don't mind working late." Mick held her gaze for just one more moment, and in that glance, wordless and full of something unspoken, something small but powerful shifted. He turned and left. The door jingled behind him, then silence fell again. Sophia stood still, suit in hand, her heart racing. Not because of his money, not because of his fame, but because for the first time in her life, a man had said her name like it mattered. And somewhere down the street, as Mick Johnson walked through the rain toward his car, he whispered to himself, "Sophia Grace, who are you really?" He had come to town for business, but something inside him already knew. He was going to return to that little shop again, not for the suit, but for the girl behind the thread. 2 days later, the bell above the door jingled again. Sophia looked up, and her breath caught. Mick Johnson was back. This time, the storm in his eyes looked calmer, but still powerful. Still dangerous in ways her heart didn't know how to handle. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out from behind the counter. "Your suit is ready," she said softly. He nodded and slipped off his coat, revealing a crisp white shirt beneath. He handed her the jacket like it was something precious. But he didn't care about the suit anymore. He came for her. She gestured toward the fitting room, but Mick just stood there. "May I try it here?" he asked. She blinked. "Here?" He smiled a little. "You'll see better in the light." Sophia hesitated, then nodded. As he slipped the jacket on, she stepped behind him. With a dozen silver pins and trembling fingers, she began to adjust the sleeves. The world seemed to grow quiet. Only the soft tick of the clock, the hum of the sewing machine behind her, and her heartbeat, loud enough to hear. She worked carefully, gently, her fingers brushing the fabric. Then his wrist. A spark shot up her spine. She pulled her hand away quickly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't answer. She didn't have the words. He studied her face in the mirror, her lashes, the worry hiding in her smile. "You're not from around here?" she asked suddenly, needing to break the silence. Mick shook his head slowly. "Number I'm from New York, but I've been to LA, Paris, Dubai. Too many cities, too many lies." He turned his head slightly, catching her eyes in the mirror. "I like quiet towns, real places, real people." Sophia smiled, her heart skipping a beat. "Not many real people walk in wearing a $6,000 suit," she said softly. He laughed, a low, warm sound, the kind of laugh that wrapped around her like a soft scarf in winter. "Touché," he said. "But I don't feel like that person when I'm here. Not when I talk to you." Sophia looked down, flustered. She didn't know what to say, and yet something had shifted between them. A needle had threaded something invisible, something neither of them could name just yet. That day Mick stayed longer. He asked about her grandfather, about how she learned to sew. He listened when she spoke, really listened. When he left, she thought she might never see him again. But the next day, he returned, and the next, each time with a new shirt to tailor, or a jacket, or a tie that didn't sit quite right. It was obvious. He didn't need new clothes. He just needed an excuse to see her. One morning he brought her coffee, just the way she liked it. Cream, no sugar. "How did you know?" she asked, smiling. "I watch people," he replied, "especially when I care." She didn't respond, but her fingers trembled slightly as she stitched a hem. The next day he brought flowers, wildflowers, not expensive ones, but soft, colorful, beautiful. "These reminded me of you," he said. Sophia didn't know how to react. No one had ever brought her flowers, not on birthdays, not on holidays. She placed them in an old mason jar by the window. Every time she looked at them, her chest tightened. She tried to keep her distance, tried not to read too much into his visits. He was rich, handsome, powerful. A man like that didn't belong in her world. But Mick made her feel seen, and that scared her more than anything. He asked her once if she liked music. She told him she hummed when she worked, but never played the radio. "I'd like to hear you hum," he said softly. She blushed and looked away. Then one afternoon, as the rain tapped gently on the windows, something changed again. He stood by the counter, watching her sew. Her head was bent low, her lashes casting shadows over her cheeks. And suddenly he said it, not loud, not planned, but from somewhere deep and real. "Sophia, I think I'm falling for you." She froze. The needle stopped in her hand. The thread slipped from her fingers. Her heart pounded so hard she thought he could hear it. She looked up, eyes wide. "No games," he added, stepping closer. "I don't care about your past. I don't care about your shop or your clothes. I care about you, your quiet strength, your eyes, your kindness." Sophia didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Like she mattered. Like she was something precious. "I'm just a tailor," she whispered. "You're not just anything," he said. "You're the first person who's made me want to stay in one place." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken words, full of trembling hope. And as he reached for her hand, softly, carefully, like he was asking permission, she didn't pull away. That night she lay awake in her small room above the shop. Her fingers traced the petals of the flowers he'd brought, and for the first time in years, she dared to dream of something more, of something hers, of a future that didn't hurt. It began with one dinner. Mick invited Sophia to a quiet restaurant just outside of town. She almost said no. She looked at her hands, rough from years of sewing, her dresses, simple, handmade. But when she saw him waiting at the door, holding a rose like it was something sacred, she said yes. That night she wore her best outfit, still modest. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't need to. He pulled out her chair, poured her water, and smiled like she was the only person in the world. And she laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. After that, he came every evening, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit and talk while she stitched late into the night. They talked about everything: his childhood, her grandfather, dreams they were afraid to say out loud. She told him she'd never been kissed, not because she was waiting for magic, but because no one ever looked at her like she deserved one. He looked at her differently after that, not with pity, but with something deeper: honor. He never rushed her, never crossed lines, never made her feel small. He told her she mattered, that her silence had strength in it, that her hands had magic. One evening, under the soft glow of the tailor shop's hanging lamp, he brought her homemade soup. She had a cold. He'd made it himself. "I thought rich men had chefs," she teased, sniffling. "I do," he said with a grin, "but none of them know how to make soup with this much care." He made her feel like royalty, in the only place she'd ever called home. Not because of diamonds, but because he saw her. And then one Sunday afternoon, after 5 quiet, beautiful months, he walked in wearing the first suit she had ever tailored for him. She was crouched at the sewing machine, hair messy, thread between her fingers. He knelt behind her and said her name. She turned, and there he was, down on one knee, in the middle of fabric scraps and hanging measuring tape, holding out a ring that sparkled like it held a galaxy inside it. "I don't care about your past," he said softly. "I don't care about your silence. I don't care about the people who made you feel less than you are." He paused, his voice trembled. "I care about you, Sophia Grace, about your courage, your kindness, your hands that stitch hope. You changed my life. Will you marry me?" She stared at him, frozen. Her hands trembled, and then her heart broke open. "Yes," she whispered as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, Mick, I will." He stood, wrapped her in his arms, and kissed her forehead. Not her lips. Not yet. It was a kiss of promise, of safety, of forever. The town? It didn't take long for the whispers to start. "Did you hear? That rich guy proposed to her? Sophia Grace, the tailor? Why her?" someone scoffed. "She's not even pretty, not rich, not important." Others were worse. "She's not his type. He could have married someone of his class. She probably trapped him." Racist comments showed up online. "She doesn't fit the picture. She doesn't belong in his world." Sophia saw them, every word. She never said a thing. She simply went back to work, cutting cloth, sewing seams, making dresses for people who didn't know what Grace really looked like. But Mick saw them too, and he didn't stay silent. At a town fundraiser, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, someone asked, "Mr. Johnson, why her?" He looked into the camera without flinching. "I didn't fall in love with her status," he said. "I fell in love with her soul." He stepped closer, holding Sophia's hand. "She's the kindest person I've ever met. She taught me to slow down, to listen. She never asked for a single thing, but gave me everything I never knew I needed." Silence fell over the room. "I didn't fall in love with a class. I fell in love with her heart." The video went viral. Millions watched it. Some still criticized, But many more were moved. People who'd felt invisible, like Sophia. People who were judged by their clothes, jobs, skin color, or background. They wrote letters, sent messages. You gave us hope. You reminded us love doesn't care about class. You showed us what real looks like. Sophia kept sewing, but now strangers came into her shop with warmth in their eyes. Not mockery, not doubt, respect. And Mick, he stood by her side, in the shop, in the world, in the silence and the storm, because he didn't just propose to her, he chose her, loudly, proudly, and forever. The wedding was simple, by the edge of a quiet lake, under a sky painted with gold and rose. Sophia wore a gown she stitched herself, ivory lace, flowing and soft like a cloud. Mick wore the suit she first tailored for him, the suit that brought him into her world. There were no celebrities, no grand ballroom, just love, close friends, a quiet violin, and vows that made the guests wipe tears from their eyes. I promise, Mick had said, to always protect your heart like it's the most precious thing I own. And Sophia, voice trembling, whispered, I promise to trust you, even when I'm scared. They danced slowly beneath fairy lights, her head on his chest, his hands wrapped gently around her waist. After the wedding, they left for the honeymoon. A small beach house tucked away from the world. Waves lapped at the shore. The wind whispered through palm leaves. It was paradise. For the first 2 days, they explored hand in hand, collected seashells, laughed over burned pancakes they tried to make together, told childhood stories by candlelight. He called her Angel. She called him Home. Everything felt like a dream she didn't dare believe was real. But on the third night, as the sky turned indigo and stars blinked awake, something changed. Sophia stood by the bedroom window. The moonlight spilled across her nightgown. She looked like something out of a poem, soft, pure, fragile. Mick, lounging on the bed, looked up and smiled, but her face was pale. Her fingers trembled. He sat up. Sophia? She turned to him, eyes glistening. I need to tell you something. Her voice was barely above a whisper. His smile faded. What is it? She looked down. Her toes curled against the wooden floor. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he could hear it. I've never been with anyone before. Mick blinked, confused. You mean, I've never been with a man? Not in any way, she whispered. Not even kissed anyone before you. Silence. The air felt thick. She stared at the floor, ashamed. Her cheeks burned. I know it's strange, she rushed, but I didn't want to give myself to someone who wouldn't stay. I didn't want to be just another mistake. I didn't know if I was waiting for something real. I was waiting for love. Her voice broke on the last word. Then she added, almost in a whisper, I was waiting for you, even when I didn't know your name. Mick didn't move. He just stared at her. His jaw clenched. She thought he was disappointed. I understand if you want to wait, or if this changes things. Tears welled in her eyes, but then he stood, walked over to her, and gently, ever so gently, cupped her face in his hands. You waited for love, he said, his voice low and full of emotion. You waited for me. Her breath caught. And now I know how sacred your love is, how strong. You didn't give it away lightly. You treasured it. And now you're trusting me with it. He kissed her forehead, lingering there like a vow. I will treasure that gift for the rest of my life. Sophia burst into tears, but he didn't rush her, didn't pull her into anything she wasn't ready for. He simply held her, arms strong, heart open, no demands, no pressure, just safety and love. They stood like that for minutes, maybe hours. The waves crashed outside like a lullaby. And that night, they didn't touch like lovers. They held each other like soulmates. She fell asleep in his arms, curled into his chest, and he whispered into her hair, You are worth waiting for. Worth every second, every year I spent alone. I love you, Sophia, not for what you give me, but for who you are. Outside, the stars shimmered. Inside, a woman who once felt invisible, finally felt seen, truly deeply seen, and loved. The mansion stood tall, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But Sophia didn't care for any of it. She spent most of her days back at her little shop, the same one her grandfather once ran, the same one where her life had quietly stitched itself into something extraordinary. The gold plaque on the window now read, Grace Tailoring and Empowerment Center. She could have left that life behind, but she didn't, because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to feel like your voice didn't matter, to have dreams stitched in silence. Sophia reopened the shop with a new purpose, not just to tailor clothes, but to tailor futures. She began recruiting young girls from poor neighborhoods, girls with bruised hearts and calloused hands just like she once had. Girls society called too poor, too dark, too broken. She taught them how to sew, how to believe, how to lift their chins when the world pushed them down. Immigrant women who couldn't speak much English. Single mothers with nowhere to leave their kids. Teens fresh out of shelters. Sophia opened her arms to them all. Everyone deserves a chance, she said softly. Everyone deserves to be seen. Mick watched with pride. He came by every week, often bringing warm food or supplies. Sometimes he stayed to help fold fabric, surprising everyone. "You're the millionaire," one girl had gasped. "You're Mick Johnson." He just smiled. I'm Sophia's husband. He never let his name overshadow hers. He never tried to own her light. He just helped it shine brighter. When a major magazine heard about their story, they sent a reporter to cover it. The journalist asked almost cynically, "Mr. Johnson, with your status, your money, your looks, why marry a tailor from a small town when you could have had a supermodel? A Hollywood star?" Mick smiled, but there was a fire in his eyes. "Because none of them had what Sophia has," he said slowly. "She has a soul untouched by greed, a heart untouched by hate." He glanced at his wife, who stood in the corner helping a shy girl thread a needle. "She loved me when she didn't know my name. She saw me when I wasn't trying to impress, and she gave me peace in a world full of noise." The article went viral. People were stunned. Some mocked, some sneered, but many began to reflect. A video clip of Sophia hugging a dark-skinned girl who had just finished her first stitched blouse reached millions. Comments poured in. "She's what the world needs. True love isn't about class or race or beauty." May we all find a Sophia in our lives. The once quiet shop grew into a movement. Women across the country reached out to volunteer, to donate, to learn. Sophia gave interviews, but she always stayed humble. "I was once a girl who believed no one would love me," she said, voice trembling. "Now I spend my life reminding others that they are already enough. And the town that once whispered cruel things, it changed too. They built a community sewing hall named Grace Center for Girls Rising. And on the wall beneath a painted portrait of Sophia and Mick, read a quote, "Love sees no class, no color, only the soul." Mick and Sophia walked hand in hand through that hall one afternoon. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Marrying you was the best decision of my life." She smiled softly. "And loving you made me brave enough to love others." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, lighting the town in gold, a town once filled with judgment and quiet cruelty, it now held something more powerful, hope. And from one tailor's needle and one millionaire's heart, a lesson echoed across the country. Love, real, enduring love, doesn't care for race, riches, or rules. It only asks one thing, to be given freely and with truth.